All right, good evening, everybody. We're gonna get started. Hope everybody's doing well on this lovely and cooling Thursday evening, and everybody had a lovely Rosh Hashanah. It was meaningful. It was beautiful here at the Adams Street Shul. And we were very lucky to be gathering community this year in more fully fledged a community that we've been in a while. So really, and it was my honor to be back with the community as well. So wish everybody Gemara Chatima Tova. Okay, so so I'm putting into the chat the today's handout, the PDF of today's handout. So we'll give everybody a moment to click on that link that I just put in there, and we will start momentarily. We're going to spend a few minutes just to preview tonight's class. We'll spend a few minutes talking about the Baldwin essay. So for folks who have not had a chance to read it or would like just a quick refresher, it's on pages 3 through, or at least excerpts of it are on page 3 through 5. So we're going to ask folks to just weigh in and offer some thoughts and maybe some questions. And it's certainly an incredibly complicated piece. I'll do a quick summary of it, and if people want to do a quick peruse of it while I'm doing that, that would be that's obviously fine. So anyway, we'll do a brief recap and discussion about the Baldwin piece, and then we're going to move on to another story. Actually, this one from the perspective of a Jewish woman who's also a person of color, telling her own story in Jewish community. And we're going to finish with one of the most powerful documents of race and racism that I've ever come across. It was a 1988 piece called "Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack," and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that. So that'll be the third thing we do, and we'll wrap it all up by tying together all the Mussar lessons that we've learned. So just again for the to introduce ourselves to the audience, I'm Yoni Cadden. I'm a long-standing teacher at Gann Academy and member also at Adams Street Shul. And this is.
And I am Barry Consix, a long-standing member of the Adams Street Shul, and delighted to be collaborating with Yoni, who is a wonderful teacher and really inspiring person to work with.
Thank you. And I feel the same way, Barry, about you. This has been really, I think, a partnership through and through in every conceivable way, and it's been an honor to put together the class and to teach it with you. So thank you. And really, I think in many ways that this is a long time coming. You and I have been thought partners about race and racism in the world generally for many years. So.
That is true.
Okay, so we're going to turn our attention to James Baldwin's essay. I'll do a very quick recap, and I'll then invite the audience, those to jump on in and offer their thoughts. So this was an article that was published in the New York Times, quite a lengthy article, in 1967 by James Baldwin. For those of you who don't know who James Baldwin was, he was one of the foremost writers on civil rights in the 1960s and 70s, an incredibly deep thinker about the place of race and racism. And in most instances, and this is actually critical to the article we're reading here tonight, read here for tonight, his audience by and large were fellow Black people. And he wrote largely to fellow Black people. He challenged them often. He challenged them in an array of different ways. And in many ways, this article was meant as a challenge to his fellow Black people. So in 1967, he publishes the article, "Negroes are anti-Semitic because they're anti-white." And in the majority of the article, and it's excerpted here, the whole article, there's a link to it in your you can reach through the handout, but the full article. But in any event, he describes in the beginning of the article a litany of ways in which the Black people in Harlem felt slighted and cheated in their lives in almost every conceivable way. And oftentimes it was at the hands of Jewish people, be it the grocer, be it their landlords, be it the butcher, whoever it is. They felt Black people were feeling as if they were cheated out of whatever it was, and that it was Jewish people who were doing it. And there was understandable, he says, anger. He then goes on in the vast majority of the essay to try to understand what is the place of Jews in the world? And why is it that, how could it be, he wonders, that Jews just moments before this essay was written had been amidst the most atrocious example of racism in the history of humanity, could now emigrate to a new country and be perpetrators of racism? How could that be? He asks. And his argument is that Jews, in many ways, in this instance, have been carrying the water of European Christianity. European Christianity, which has sought world dominance, global dominance, for hundreds of years, has enlisted all sorts of different groups of people to assist them. And that here's a moment where Jews have taken up that assistance, doing the work of white Christians. And then that is why Black people have now encountered Jews now as their oppressors. In so many ways should not be, doesn't make sense, but that is why he argues we are in this space. And yet, because his audience, and again, he uses the word "you" in this audience, in this article 28 times, each time referring to Black people, he reminds them, and just to look at the final piece of the article, he says, the second to last paragraph on page 5, all racist positions baffle and appall me. None of us are that different from one another, neither that much better nor that much worse. Furthermore, when one takes a position, one must attempt to see where that position inexorably leads. One must ask oneself, if one decides that Black or white or Jewish people are, by definition, to be despised, is one willing to murder a Black or white or Jewish baby? For that is where the position leads. And if one blames a Jew for having become a white American, one may perfectly well, if one is Black, be speaking out of nothing more than envy. So he's really setting up a challenge to fellow Black people. And yet, he wrote this article in the New York Times. And James Baldwin knew who his audience was. Yes, it was fellow Black community members in Harlem, where he himself had grown up.
Who read the New York Times.
And read the New York Times. But the audience was predominantly middle-class white people, many of whom were Jews. And so he knew who his other audience was. And so I want to leave it at that. I just want to add, I was not meaning to summarize this in any way to put a period and exclamation point on, on this and to say this is what the article is. I would love to hear from everyone here what their take of it is. But it was really meant just to catch everybody up to speed for those who didn't read it, and even for those who did, to just offer a bit of a quick summary. But we'd love to hear from you. Again, feel free to put your thoughts into the chat or offer them vocally. Your thoughts, any aspect of it that jumped out at you, that you have thoughts about, that resonated with you, that you have concerns about, you're wondering about, that made you angry. Yeah, pick your reaction. We're not looking for any particular reaction. We want to know where people are coming from as they encountered this piece.
Yoni and Barry.
Yes, Mark, please.
Is that the last? Those are the last two paragraphs.
These are the last two paragraphs of the article, both in the excerpted piece that I've given you and also his piece in the Times. Yes.
Okay. So I think, thank you. I think it's worth looking at the last paragraph, in which he says, I know, well, he talks about the last few sentences. I also know that if today I refuse to hate Jews or anybody else, it's because I know how it feels to be hated. So I'm thinking of how Jews might regard others, because they should never forget that they were slaves in Egypt. Can you hear me?
We can, no, we can, and we're listening, and we're hearing you, yeah.
So, I think that last paragraph is very powerful. But I also think that he seems to be viewing Jews as monolithic, which is, and blacks maybe as well. And I think one thing that's become apparent in many sociological studies is that cultural groups are not monolithic. But for purposes of his argument, I understand why he's doing that.
Yeah.
Because I think he's also saying, like, maybe not all black people, but if there are black people that hate Jews or don't like Jews, this is why. So not necessarily trying to say that, could be that there are other cases. So anyway, that was just a thought, like, that I was having while reading it. But I also, it's a hard piece to read.
Yeah. And can you speak a little bit more to that?
Well, it just doesn't feel good because it doesn't feel like we are the people who have been oppressed and we don't want to be the oppressor. And our liturgy speaks to that. Like we have this, because we dwelled in the land of Egypt and we know how it is to be slaves. Like we are an oppressed people, we are not the oppressor. And even when we are the oppressor, right? When we have white privilege or when we use our economic privilege to oppress other people, like we still probably don't even think of ourselves in that way.
Of course not.
And
that's part of
that's right.
what Marx said, well, we were slaves in Egypt. I think you would have to work very hard to find modern American Jews who accept in a sort of a verbal way. Oh yeah, we were slaves in Egypt. Do they feel like slaves?
Yeah.
No. Do they feel like they
No, and they don't want to be considered,
Exactly.
So it's like an interesting, because it's like, who do you think you are? And it takes a level of self-awareness to then extrapolate and go beyond what, what might be the reality or what is the reality.
That is a very, very important point that we are going to go into.
Yeah.
In the section on the knapsack, which really that comment of yours speaks directly to the issue of white privilege and lack of self-awareness. Yeah, that I'm not thinking that I should be nice to people because I know what it was like when they were not nice to me.
And actually, Mark, what I think is interesting about what you said, particularly bringing out that last line, is that, I also know that if today I refuse to hate Jews or anyone else, it is because I know how it feels to be hated. But then you actually have to do work because just because you've been oppressed doesn't mean that, and in fact, the reality is that most people who are victims of violence become perpetrators of violence. So you actually have to do like a work, spiritual and otherwise, to actually get to a place where you're not going to perpetuate violence again. And that's true for Black people, and it's true for Jews.
It's true for human beings.
It's true for everyone, right? And so, and I think James Baldwin is trying to do that too. Like, I think this is a reaching out to Jewish people. Like, because Jewish people, I think, when they experienced anti-Semitism from the Black community, they were confused. And so he knows who his audience is, and he wants to explain it. And that last line, and I would be interested in hearing what the last paragraph is, but like, he's trying to say like, I know how it feels to be hated, you do too.
Yeah.
Like, we need to work together. So, but, you know, reading it, like, you have to like go through a lot to get, you know, to kind of, anyway, to feel that, to hear it.
Yeah, and I just wanna just name, and Mark, I know you're gonna jump in, and I think you have a few things that are important I wanna add, but just, you know, to amplify Barry, what you're saying is that so much of what we've been doing here is looking at the civil rights story, history, writing, etc., and then really looking at that through the lens of Jewish Mussar, of Jewish ethics, and what does it mean to take a stance that people do? What does it mean to engage in something that's really hard, that hits you right in your kishkish as you're reading that, and rather than just rejecting it or allowing your defensiveness or guilt or shame to take over, instead to say, I have work to do. I have to stop, I have to listen, and now I have work to do. That's exactly, yeah, I think it's exactly what we have to be thinking about. Yeah. Mark Whittam, I think, has a couple of points.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I suppose, you know, the point of the class isn't necessarily sort of deconstructing the essay and so on. But I mean, you know, it took a few reads of it, and then I went to the Times and read the whole thing, and, you know, found it, you know, very nuanced, and it was almost like, what is that concept of unreliable narrator? I felt like the very provocative part that was sort of the front, you know, the first section, where it's unclear to me who the perspective of who is speaking there, because, like, you know, I feel like James Baldwin kind of tips his hand where he says, the merchants along 125th Street were Jewish, at least many of them were. I don't know if Grants or Woolworths are Jewish names, ... I mean, it feels like, I mean, he knows very well that Grants and Woolworths are not Jewish names. So, you know, and thinking about the audience, I mean, it seems like it's there's this kind of multiple trajectories here. I'm going to read the, you know, the last paragraph of the Times, in the Times, which isn't here. It says, the crisis taking place in the world and in the minds and hearts of Black men everywhere is not produced by the Star of David, but by the old rugged Roman cross on which Christendom's most celebrated Jew was murdered, and not by Jews. So, I mean, it does obviously kind of address, you know, some level of Jewish, you know, whatever you want to call it, you know, complicity or participation, and being enmeshed in this racist structure. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. It's a very, you know, it's a very complicated essay. I mean, the first part, when I did read the first part, like I said, I mean, I couldn't say that I, you know, became, you know, angry, but it was very, you know, it's obviously very provocative, like talking about, it is true that many Jews use shamelessly the slaughter of the 6 million by the Third Reich as proof that they cannot be bigots. Again, that's sort of like, which narrator is saying that?
An interesting comments.
So I'm still thinking it through. I mean, I think the fundamental points of, you know, Jews, even in a sense, playing a role. I mean, in the Pale Settlement, Jews were playing a role of middlemen and being despised by people, and, you know, not, you know, in various strata of society. You know, it is, you know, it's sort of like a, you know,
Right, and the idea
Christians.
that because I'm Jewish, I couldn't possibly be a bigot.
Right, but to that, like, Christians have used Jews for millennia around, like, having us as the middlemen, and so, like, now we're sort of the, you know, in you know, coming to America, we're the petit bourgeois, so we're like in the middle of it, like, literally.
I'm still
No,
unpacking.
And I want to just add, Mark, to, you know, and to encourage actually what you're saying about still wanting to sit with this, because that ultimately is the goal here. This essay is not, we're not going to unpack it all tonight, not even close. I don't even think we're gonna understand it tonight. I've read this thing, I don't know, dozens of times. I still don't fully get it. It's a really complicated piece, and that's why I wanted to bring it to all of us, because our practice of Hitlam demands that we sit with things and that we allow them to resonate and that we allow them to percolate, and that we, rather than just saying it feels hard or it feels complicated, I
don't
sense
like
things
it.
I don't like exactly, that we move on, but rather I'm going to struggle with this. I'm going to wrestle with this, because ultimately that's my achrayut, that is my responsibility. I want to actually transition from there into reading a few of the comments in here to amplify the voices of people who are in our chat. And there are several people commenting in, so I'm going to read them all, but I want to actually point that to one has been here for a bit. I find it unfortunate that Baldwin states at one point the Jews contributed to the civil rights movement out of guilt. And I want to just comment on that for a moment, because I think that I remember thinking to my feeling myself, thinking and feeling, but more of a feeling. How can you say that? Like that hurt. I can't. I did not. I wasn't alive when the civil rights movement was happening, but I knew plenty of people who were there, and I don't think that they were there by guilt alone. I think, I'm not saying it wasn't a motivating factor, but I imagine that many people were there for all sorts of other reasons. I'm sitting next to a person who was deeply engaged in the civil rights movement.
I want to react to that in two ways. Number one, the Jewish people that I knew in the movement, the estimates by other people were that probably 50%, if not more, of the people who went south to work in the movement were Jewish. And their motivation very often was that they felt that it was their understanding of social justice that motivated them to participate. And the guilt, I think it's not exactly the word I would use, but I think that there were people who did understand their white, what we now would call white privilege, and who felt that they should do something to, what's the word, not to accommodate it, to make it right. So I wouldn't entirely say it was guilt. I think it's more subtle than that, but perhaps a small understanding of the idea that if we can make things better for them, it will make things better for ourselves. So I wouldn't entirely discount the word, although I think it's like Baldwin, it's provocative, and thank you for being provocative, for making us think about this.
Absolutely, and I think that's ultimately where I would like to go as well, is that I think that when you get to a place in the essay that really hits you hard, that those should be the moments, like the guilt piece or whatever it is. Those should be the moments where we pause and we ask ourselves, what exactly is hard about this? Why is this hard to hear? What am I supposed to do with this? And I want to actually, there's so much more to say, and with your forgiveness, I do want to move into because we have a lot more to do, and I want to make sure we get a chance to do it. I want to invite everybody to continue the conversation about this essay. This should not at all be the last we speak of it, but I do want to make sure that we have an opportunity to actually use this moment to transition to our final Mussar points.
Just to mention this article by Isabel.
But we'll come back to her in a moment.
Okay.
Yeah. So in your handout, if you have the physical copy or the PDF, or you can look on the screen, it's on page 6. Is our final Mussar point. And the Mussar concept. And the Mussar concept is called the Bechira. And so I'm going to use what we were just talking about, Baldwin, a moment ago, to transition into this Mussar idea. So what is the Bechira? So one of the great Mussar thinkers of the late 19th, early 20th century was Eliyahu Gesser, who was actually the great grandson-in-law of Rabbi Salanter, who was the great founder of the Mussar movement today. He actually came up with a really radical idea about the notion of free will. And it was, in many ways, it was a departure from Jewish thought around the idea of free will. Within Judaism, there's a big debate about free will. Rambam, Maimonides believes that we human beings have essential free will and that we are always agents of choice. We can do whatever we choose to in this world. And in fact, Rambam went even, others went even so far as to say, and God cannot actually stop you from that. And so therefore, God is limited by the ultimate choice, the freedom that human beings have. And there are others who say that we don't have any free will at all, that God is ultimately all-knowing, and so that whatever choices that we make are really just illusions, and that we're on a path that God has foreordained. Eliyahu Dessler says, you're actually both right and you're both wrong. Ultimately, he said that we are, as human beings, that's a profound idea. Most of the time, we are on autopilot. We actually are not agents of choice in most things we do. We are creatures of habit. We are creatures, we create all sorts of worlds for ourselves. And he says, somebody who was good, and I'll tell you a quick story about this that resonated with me. If you were born into a good world in which giving charity and being good to others is just a matter of course, you're taught to hold the door for somebody else, and you walk up to the building and you open the door and you hold it for somebody. You haven't really made a choice to do it. You've just been trained to do it because that's what you do. The choice may come is so if the person drops something and then is far down, do you pick it up and chase the person? That's where your choice may come. And similarly with somebody who was raised without those sorts of good moral virtues, they may do bad things, that to other people without thinking about it, and they too are not necessarily agents of choice. I remember once my father, this is one of my favorite stories about this. It was we had just had fleischiks for dinner. My father, I guess, had come home, had not eaten dinner with us, and he took out some ice cream and was eating the ice cream. And he turned to me and asked me if I wanted to have some ice cream. I said, no, I just had fleischiks. I can eat for dinner, and I can't eat milk. And he sort of looked at me and he said, it's really amazing that you have that kind of willpower. And I thought to myself, that's not willpower. I don't know what you're talking about. It's just that I'm not supposed to eat milk after meat. There's no choice here. I didn't know in that moment that I was not really making a choice, that I was engaged in this Bechira point idea, which I'll explain in a second. I just knew I was raised that way, and so that's what I do. Rabbi Dessler says it is the obligation of the ethical person in the world to move as many moments in their life that are on autopilot to what he calls bechira points, the moments of choice. Because if you can take things that are autopilot for you and move them into moments of choice, you can then start doing the hitlamdut work. You can then start doing the self-reflective work that is required to really think about things in a much deeper way, in a much more reflective way. And then you can move yourself into a stance of achrayut, of responsibility. What do I have to do? So to tie that back to the Baldwin essay, what Rabbi Dessler would say is that we would probably, in most instances, read an article like the Baldwin essay, and had we not been prompted in a class like this to really notice and think, etc., we may read it, as most of us do through the course of our day. We read something and we react. In some cases, whatever, it's schlock, I'm not thinking about it, but in a lot of cases we do react, and we react either with happiness, I really like that piece, or react with anger or despair, or whatever it is. But we rarely stop and ask ourselves why. We rarely take that moment and turn it into a bechira, and turn it into a choice, where I'm going to actually stop and interrogate what it is that I'm doing in this very moment. And then to do the work of hitlamdut, of self-exploration, what's going on. And so really the challenge here is to take things in our lives, to take these moments in our lives, both positive or negative, and really allow them to move from autopilot into thoughtful choice, into bechira point, and then to really be reflective about what the right choices are for us. And so that is the final Mussar point here, and he spells it out more on pages 6 6 and 7. Just read his words. I think it's worth just hearing him in Rabbi Dessler's voice. We'll just read a bit of it and then we'll move, I think, to our final story of the evening. Everyone has free choice, he writes. We're at the bottom of page 6. Everyone has free choice at the point where truth meets falsehood. In other words, Bechira takes place at the point where the truth, as the person sees it, confronts the illusion produced in him by the power of falsehood. But the majority of a person's actions are undertaken without any clash between truth and falsehood taking place. Many of a person's actions may happen to coincide with what is objectively right because he has been brought up that way and it doesn't occur to him to do otherwise. And many bad and false decisions may be taken simply because the person does not realize that they are bad. In such cases, no valid bechira or choice has been made. It is our obligation to really elevate our mundane, unthinking lives into thinking lives. So I just want to pause for questions or thoughts or on that before we move on. Make sure that people have time to process this idea of the bechira.
I think it requires tremendous, let me say, powers of concentration. A person may do something because they were brought up that way and didn't even think about it. It's not that they're being good because they choose to be good, but they were trained to be good. Or that they do mean things because nobody ever told them that wasn't a nice thing to do. And I think that it requires enormous self-awareness. And perhaps it is really appropriate that in these 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that we are thinking about choices and how we behave. And we're asking ourselves, why am I doing that? Maybe I shouldn't do that. How can I change what I am doing? And I think that speaks very directly to this particular, and I'm thinking, and this is really weird, the part of the Siddur where it says that we're going to be inscribed who will live and who will die. And I think to myself, if I read that thinking, how am I going to die? What fate is God going to have for me? How would I change what I do if I had to choose between drowning or burning? That the idea that we are going to make choices and that those choices have, in the world to come, in the year ahead, those choices are very important. But that really the choices are not these 10 days. The choices that we make are the choices we've made all year long, every day. And that is really what we need to think about. And that the punishments are very abstract, but they arise out of the choice we made to do good or to do bad. End of speech.
I mean, it's kind of, it seems like it's a kind of a balance to be struck. It's a little bit like that whole I, thou, I, you stuff. Like you can't have I, thou moments, every, I mean, I guess you can, like the I, thou moment with the taxi driver. I guess you can.
I don't even know that Martin Buber would necessarily say that should be the ultimate object of our daily experience. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times I think of, I mean, it seems like if you, with the hero points, when you made good decisions, the same, you become acclimated to holding doors open for people or behaving, if being on autopilot, if you're spring loaded to do the right thing, that's a good thing. And hopefully, those aren't really choices. And I guess when choice points come up, it'll be a virtuous circle. You'll kind of build on your level, your midot of your characteristics of acting positively. I guess kind of the challenging thing is when you're in a vicious circle and you need to make you're at a bechira point and you don't realize it. That's kind of the hard, the hard part, when you, I mean, and of course, you think, you know, everything's going fine for me, the system that I'm in is working pretty good for me. You're thinking about, you know, what kind of choices have been made for me, or do I need to make to, you know, if there's some negative thing that's going off over the horizon that I have, that I'm enmeshed in, you know, it's realizing that here are points to be made. That's a pretty challenging thing to do. I mean, it, you know, needs to be done, but it's a challenging thing to do because you have to think outside yourself.
And by the way, none of what we're doing here over the course of really only 4 one-hour sessions is meant to apply that, you know, because we talked about it for, you know, 20 minutes. You should have it in your dear. Rabbi Dessler talks about all of the work that is required to get us into a space where exactly as you're describing, that we are able to even recognize that we have a Bechira point, let alone then to act on it, and then to get yourself moving into that forward momentum is so hard. And you know, he has all sorts of different practices to get us there. But you're right. Thank you for naming that, Mark. Yeah, essential. I want to want to move us into a story, I think, that is in many ways enmeshed in this idea of the Bechira point. And by the way, there are several in here that we can point out. There's a story here, just to quickly fly through the stories in the packet we're not going to read. Isabel Wilkerson wrote a wonderful book, several wonderful books. We've read one in the very beginning of our class together called The Wonderful Mother's Sons. Also recently wrote a book called Caste about the race hierarchy in America around the idea of caste. Tells stories about her own experiences that in many ways are just saturated with Bechira points. And they're well worth reading through that lens. Another story here on the next page after that is a story of Bechira points that happened not that long ago here in our city of Boston, where the police arrested a Black man who slumped over the steering wheel of his car and took him in handcuffs for drunken driving when he had actually had a stroke, and then brought him to the hospital. And the doctors did nothing to treat him for hours, and he luckily recovered and was able to respond to his ill treatment by both the police and the hospital. But there were Bechira points there as well that we really should be thinking about. But the story that I really want to focus on, because it really is about us in the Jewish community, is from Mara Gad. So Mara Gad is just a wonderful thinker, really beautifully tells the story of her life as a person of color in the Jewish community, and has written about that extensively. And I really want to focus on one story that she told, because it's one that I think we all, you know, could do some thinking about, and thinking about where are the Bechira points along the way in the story. So she tells a little bit about her own personal background on page 14, and then moves into the story I want to tell here on page 15, where she was invited to the United Conference of Reform Judaism and to be one of the primary speakers there, and to talk about inclusivity, to talk about equity in the world and in the Jewish world, etc. And so the story that we're about to hear is that much more poignant. So she writes, if you're following along in the hard copy, the second full paragraph down on page 14. But for moment one at the conference, things did not go as we hoped they would. When I went to pick up my credentials at the conference hotel, I was told that the quote real Mara Gad needed to pick up her badge. And when I replied that I was the real Mara Gad, I did not receive an apology. Instead, the person behind the desk said, "Really?" So again, just to remind, I sort of glossed over that she is a person of color, adopted into a family. Her dad was Black, her mom was white, and she was adopted. And she tells the story of what it was like to grow up as a person of color, as a young woman of color in the Jewish community up until that point. Sorry, I realized I may have said that too quickly, so that's important and critical to the story. Anyway, I was eventually given my very bright orange badge that clearly said presenter across the bottom, but that did nothing to prevent the avalanche of racist, intolerant, ignorant behavior that followed. I was assumed to be hotel staff twice, while wearing my bright orange badge, and told that I needed to do more to get room service orders out faster. I was repeatedly and incredulously asked, "What are you doing here?" And when I replied that I was a featured speaker on Shabbat afternoon, I was then asked what I could possibly have to speak about. I ended up in an elevator filled with attendees who whispered about me like I wasn't there. What was I doing there? And again, what could I possibly be presenting about? And one of the main themes for the biennial was about diversity and how important it was to expand our tent to include everyone. Stared at, confronted, whispered about, and assumed to work for the hotel. It all grew so uncomfortable for me to be out with the general population that I had to be escorted from place to place by URJ staff who saw for themselves the looks that I received simply being in the hallways. When others were at Friday evening services, dinner, or a song session, I was in my hotel room alone, crying, because I did not feel comfortable and safe being out with my own people. I shared these stories during my Shabbat afternoon session, and while most people asked very thoughtful questions, were empathetic and supportive, as a final moment, a woman forcefully interrupted the discussion to share what she had been thinking about the entire hour. She used her time to turn everything around on me, stating clearly and without apology that I could have made it all better for myself, that I had chosen to confront the people in the elevator and explain myself. Create comfort for them. I should have made it a teachable moment and taught them that I was Jewish. In the days that followed, I received hundreds of messages from well-intentioned people asking if rest had helped to, quote, put it behind me, and whether the many messages I received, quote, erased what happened. I also received notes saying that I should heal quickly so that I could move on because there was work to do. I received private emails saying that women who believed that it was my job to have done better with horrible people who I encountered were simply being ignorant, that she just didn't understand and that I shouldn't be so outraged. And all of this further upset me a lot. To spend time swimming in this level of racism, intolerance, and aggression was traumatic for me. My family who attended my session, to see me get attacked in the room, was horrifying. And it felt like people just didn't understand how tremendously painful all this really was.
I'm kind of looking, I've talked a couple of times, I don't.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I kind of had to kind of review, I mean, sadly, I mean, I guess it's, you know, no. You wish that something like that would be, it would have been, you know, something that would have been from decades past, but, you know, just by looking at the timeline implied from the date of the article and from her comments here, you know, that was just 2018 or thereabouts, something like that.
2018. Yeah.
And I mean, I read this, but then I also just glanced at the piece about the man who had the stroke, and I assumed that was a long time ago, and that was 2019.
All of these stories are from basically yesterday. Yeah.
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 And this is not an attack,
No.
Barry. Why did you assume it was a
No, I
long
just
time
couldn't
ago?
believe it, but like, it was like, you know, it's totally my blinders. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's horrible.
No,
And I've had stories, and I have a friend who's an African-American psychiatrist, and he's described to me coming home late at night, driving from treating, you know, working with drug addicted people, and late at, you know, coming home at 11 o'clock at night in Hyde Park and being pulled over violent, you know, and like brought into the police station as like a 75-year-old African-American man.
Yep. Yep. Other thoughts?
we can put on the chat, but
I mean, I think what's particularly hard, you know, as you know, we've been speaking kind of about, you know, we like to imagine as Jews that we, you know, that we would not be that person, that we would not, you know, that, and I just, you know, I will just speak for myself. I remember the first time I met one of the prominent leaders in the Jewish community, who was also a Black woman, at a conference that she was heading, and I did not know she was Black. And the first time I met her, I did not believe that this was the person who I'd been speaking with who organized this conference. And I have spent years now thinking, about that moment and how could that and I was actually there to talk about racism, and how could that possibly happen? And that is the work that I continue to do and have to do, and we all like to imagine it's not within us. And this is not unique to URJ, I think, in many at all. And
Let's not
we
say,
all-
well, it's just those Reform Jews.
Right.
They're different.
Yeah. It's interesting. I want to actually, I will certainly leave you all to read the Isabel Wilkerson story, but I'll just very briefly summarize it, because in many ways it's has a lot of the similarities to this story here, where she but I want to actually point out the punchline, which I think is the punchline of the story. She writes about how when she was a reporter for the New York Times, and she was going around and doing a piece in Chicago, like reporting on the new businesses that were starting to spring up around this new Chicago neighborhood. And so she got this interview. It was a very easy piece for any, a store manager to want to be a part of, because it would basically be free advertising. And so she's going around collecting all these interviews with people, and she shows up at the door of one of the posh boutiques, and the manager who was there, the speaker was supposed to be there, the speaker was not there. And so she was told to wait, and so she waited, and finally this guy comes in, and the clerk who had said wait for him pointed and basically said that's him coming in the door, and he's out of breath, and he comes up there. Isabel Wilkerson goes up to him and says, hi, I think you're here for me. He says, no, I'm not here for you. I'm here for you, I'm reporter. And she said, yeah, that's me. And he said, no, I'm waiting for it. So, I just really need to, get myself ready for that. And she said, no, it's me. And he said, do you have a card that you can show me? Do you have proof of that? And she had run out of her business card, so she couldn't show him the card. And he was like, well, if you can't prove that you're Isabel Wilkerson, then I'm sorry, I can't talk to you right now. And that was it. And so she tells that story, and here's the part that actually I really want to focus on, is on page 10. So she ran the story. The story ran that Sunday because I had not been able to interview him. He didn't get a mention. It would have amounted to a nice bit of publicity for him, but the other interviews made it unnecessary in the end. I sent him a clip of the piece along with the business card that he had asked for. To this day, I won't step inside that retailer. And here's the key. I will not mention the name, not because of censorship or desire to protect any company's reputation, but because of our cultural tendency to believe that if we just identify the presumed to be rare offending outlier, we will have rooted out the problem. The problem could have happened any place, because the problem is, in fact, at the root.
And so that actually brings you back to to Rabbi Dressler's piece, right? Because there's very good sort of neurological evidence that we are conditioned to sort of understand, how we understand the world is by past experiences, right? So and that is habitual. So this is, as he says, a spiritual practice to get us out of our habit and for everything, right? Yeah. But in particular, this is an important thing, but to let us, because that is the work, right? Because you can't, because otherwise everything becomes about our literally knee-jerk or neurological response to stereotypes. You take informed what it helps us organize the world.
Yep.
In many respects.
Yep, it does. You got it. Yeah.
So
And
but that's The dress, I've never encountered Robert.
Yeah, he is tremendous. Yeah, you know, I
He's
could not recommend him anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he is any more than I don't know, I said that wrong. I really recommend him.
Yeah.
Let's try that again.
Thank you.
And I wanna just take Barry, what you were saying, something, because I wanna talk about my own Bechira point. You know, when I read this piece here, the Wilkerson piece, and to tie it back to the Maragad's piece as well. Because I remember when I first read this piece, and I so badly wanted to know who it was. Like, who should I be angry at? And when I
And did
first,
he ever apologize?
yes.
He says that she sent him a copy of the article. Did he ever write back and say, oh my
I so
God?
badly wanted to know, and when I read the Mark God piece, I wanted to know, okay, who at that, I mean, part of what I do for a living is to study, and to get to know the various Jewish worlds, and so I know a ton of people inside URJ. And I wanted to know, who did that to you, Mark God? I want, who are the bad guys here? And I did not recognize my Bechira point, which was, wait a minute, why is that the thing I care about? Why am I getting angry at the individual? That's not the issue. The issue is, and to me, like this paragraph right here that Wilkerson points out is the most, I think, the most important paragraph in the entire book. Because I won't mention the name, not because of censorship or to protect the company, but because our cultural tendency to believe that if we just identify the presumed to be rare offending outlier, we'll have rooted out the problem.
To give it a happy ending, which
Yeah.
it lets people off the hook, so.
Yes, it
Yes,
does. That's
yes.
correct.
Perfect.
It lets
Perfect.
me off the hook because I'm not the bad guy. I've identified the bad guy over there,
Right.
and I don't have to do the work of looking at myself.
Letting someone off the hook, I think
And
that's a
shaming,
perfect way to
Right.
describe it.
right, and if we can shame someone else, then we don't have to look at ourselves.
Yep.
And you see a lot of that, right,
All the time,
all the time,
all the
because
time.
then you can make it look like you're,
The way you call it, you compare out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. See what you mean by, so people know what that.
I mean, like the
phrase-
idea is like, well, I'm not that bad.
Correct.
I'm not, this is.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I know, because of my own experience, my own story, and thank goodness, at least in retrospect, I had the Bechira point to look back and say, how could I have looked at this incredible human being, and instead of seeing, oh yes, you're the organizer of this piece, instead I saw a Black woman and thought to myself, how could you possibly be that person? So I am that person. I know that. Yeah, Mark's number right. So perhaps we're conditioned to wishing for happy Hollywood endings. To
Yes.
some degree, there's definitely a piece of that. And so to make this more concrete for myself, and I wanted to just share this with you, and this will really be the last thing we do together. But in many ways, because this has been so powerful for me in my life, I want to leave this as the last thought in our class together.
I want to introduce this a little differently from what it says, white privilege.
So hang on, Barry, let's let everybody get there. So we are on, so the
Page
people
17.
at home can look on the screen or on page 17 in the handout. Yes.
Okay, what Peggy McIntosh is, she is writing in the first person. That is, I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my own race most of the time.
So Barry was just reading from number 1.
And then she goes on for 50 incidents or moments, every one of which begins I. I want you to read this as if you were Black. And say to yourself, if I was a Black person, can I avoid spending time with people who don't like me? Can I be sure that my children will be treated equally? I think that, yeah, it's about white privilege, of course. But I think in order to really understand its impact, you should look at it from the point of the person who isn't white.
Right. In other
And
words,
to really question when you're reading it, you would say, well, of course, this meant I'm fine and whatever. But if you really look at it from the point of the other person,
Yeah.
you will really see things, I think, more clearly than if you just do it as a white person. That's
That's incredibly helpful, Barry. I've never noticed that when I've read this before so many times, I was actually reading it through that lens that you're suggesting of duality. Both when it says I can, whatever it is. Number two, I can avoid spending time with people whom I was trained to mistrust and who have learned to mistrust my kind or me. That I was both reading that as a white person, but then also in the back of my mind, I was thinking to myself, well, if I were black, would that also be true? So anyway, I want to give everybody a few moments to read this. These are insights that Peggy McIntosh collected over a long period of time and published in 1988. And so read them, and we'd love to just hear thoughts and pick any that resonate with you or any you have questions about. We'll give everybody a few minutes to read through them on pages 17 and 18. Yeah.
I want to draw your attention to number 46, which is on page 18. And I want to ask you, what color are bandages?
It's so funny. That is what, yeah. That's
What
what's
color
jumped out
is
at me
the
too.
quote flesh-colored crayon in your crayon box? I think that says it all.
Other thoughts, others that have jumped out at you as you're reading this, are making you perhaps think about, yeah.
I thought number 29 was interesting. I guess I should.
Yeah, go ahead, read that out.
I can be pretty sure that if I argue for the promotion of a person of another race or a program centering on race, this is not likely to cost me heavily within my present setting, even if my colleagues disagree with me. Somehow that kind of struck. I mean, a lot of them, a lot of them were, I mean, nothing that I particularly disagreed with. I mean, they said, yeah, that rings true. But number 29 was, made me think a little bit more.
Have you had that experience of wanting to promote or encourage your
I
person?
mean, there's occasionally I find, I mean, there have been very few applicants, sadly, for I do have occasion to interview people for engineering positions, and I think there are very few. I can only remember one black candidate who I thought did, was just as, was perfectly satisfactory for the job. So I said, he seemed pretty good at it. And so,
Did they hire?
no, they didn't. I forget who they hired. Nobody said anything untoward, but yeah, it was hard to know. I do find myself on the flip side of number 29. I mean, I shouldn't create too much, but like, for instance, I'm obviously an Orthodox Jew at work, and we have two vendors for the same product, both of whom underperform in different ways, one of whom is Israeli. So I find I have to be kind of nuanced when I don't want to seem like I'm either trying to stick it to the non-Israeli one or put a shine on the Israeli one. So I find, I feel that's relatively minor compared to what a Black person experiences. But I mean, it's sort of,
It's an important issue that there is an other in quotes. And whether that other is a Black person, an Israeli, Chinese, whatever, that person is an other. And how everyone, not just you, but how the world deals with those others is very important.
Other thoughts? Again, either weigh in the chat or verbally if you'd like, to see which, any of these that jump out at you or making you think a little. Definitely know if you're on the Zoom, it probably is gonna be easier if you open up your own copy of it, so you can scroll through it at your leisure. And then sort of moving this around, it's hard to see on the screen.
Number 25 and 39.
25, hold on, sorry, I was just about to move it, now I can't move my screen.
Okay.
Is that right? Let's see if I can find it. Could you read? I can't see my copy right now. Could you read?
25?
Yeah, 25. Yeah, if a
Traffic cop? Yep.
So if a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax form, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. So it brings to mind the expression driving while Black, or doing a lot of things while Black. That it's a totally different experience, probably. I know in Wellesley, for example, Blacks have been pulled over for driving slowly or just being there.
Just driving.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the Celtics, I don't know if you remember, a long time ago, there was a Celtic, Boston Celtic, who was in Wellesley, and I think he was going to the bank, and the cops spread eagled him. They weren't used to seeing Blacks in Wellesley.
Right. There was a bank robbery in Wellesley, and the bank robber was identified as being a tall Black man. And the Wellesley cops arrested every Black person that they saw for a period of 2 or 3 days, even though most of the people that they arrested didn't fit the description. They weren't tall, they were short. They weren't thin, they were fat. But they arrested everybody in sight.
When I was growing up, my parents taught me all sorts of lessons, how to live life and how to be a good person in the world, and in some cases, how to be a safe person in the world. They never once told me that when you get pulled over by the police, that you have to make sure that your hands stay on the steering wheel, that you have your driver's license out and on the dashboard, that you look straight ahead, that you do not make eye contact with the police, that you refer to the police officer as sir the entire time, and you keep your head down. Never once. Never once. They never once told me anything about how you're supposed to interact with the police officer. And I never once thought that that is my white privilege, that I could be pulled over by a police officer, having normal interaction with that police officer, and drive away with or without a ticket, depending on the mood, I suppose, with the officer. But whatever happened in that moment would have nothing to do with my race.
Number 39,
Yeah.
um,
Yes.
brings to mind the fact that,
You can read it.
okay, sure. So I could be late to a meeting without having having the lateness reflect on my race. So the idea of having to overperform because you're a minority, in this case, a Black, or it could be any minority, but in particular, in this country, Blacks, having to do better, having to prove yourself. And one slip up reflects on everything.
You are always on trial.
Confirmation bias, for people who have
Yes.
that bias.
Yeah, and in the comments, I'd be petrified if I had a Black son. And that is, talk about the ultimate white privilege. As a parent, to grow up, to have your children grow up in the world, and to not be terrified that because of the color of their skin, that something horrible is much more likely to happen to them in this world than to other children. Yeah, that is white privilege as well. What Peggy McIntosh, and we certainly hope you will read these. I've spent many, many hours of my life rereading these. What Peggy McIntosh really has done, I think, for us, and I want to tie this all together with our career point. I can make, there we go, trying to make my screen move. Is on page, can be found on page 19 of the handout. Along with the list of the different privileges that she listed here, she wrote a fairly lengthy essay, which I've excerpted part of it here. When she writes, I think whites, I'm looking at the third paragraph, I think whites are carefully taught not to recognize white privilege, as males are taught not to recognize male privilege. So I've begun an untutored way to ask what it is like to have white privilege. I've come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets, which I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless backpack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. Again, going back to the previous sentence about all of this, about which I was meant to remain oblivious. In other words, to go through our day in autopilot. And it is up to us to use the list that she has created, that she has now put in front of us, to make ourselves newly accountable, or to use the words of Rob Dessler, to have everyday experiences in our lives turn into behavioral points, where we can recognize what it means to have privilege, and then to do whatever we can, and to ask ourselves, what is our achrayut? What is our responsibility to now undo what the white privilege that we have in the world, to take out of the backpack the special provisions that we have, the maps, the passports, the code books, etc., to take them out of our backpack and throw them away. Again, it doesn't mean we have to fix the whole system, but we are now obligated. We are newly accountable. We have now the Bechira point in front of us, and the achrayut that is up to us individually to figure out what is our responsibility just for ourselves in any small way we possibly can to empty our own backpacks.
Why do we need to, I guess almost like my response is, I mean, the thing that occurs to me is not necessarily that, I mean, my response is that everybody should have that backpack, or everybody should have that backpack of advantages. They don't have to think, you know, this is the 1,000th and first time that I haven't been followed in a department stores. Like, I mean, I guess I would frame it, I mean, I guess.
Yeah, say it differently. Say it
I mean,
differently.
I
I
would
like
say
this.
it,
Yes.
like, I don't feel, I mean, I feel, I'm not sure when this last Macintosh essay is from, if it's from 1988, like the list here.
1980s.
Yeah.
But I feel there's some some of the issues with language, like that were maybe alluded to, like you have some list of words and things like this. Some of the issues with language are maybe unintentionally raised in here, I guess. But I mean, I guess the way I think of it is like, you know, every American should be entitled to those privileges. I don't think of it as emptying. I mean, obviously I have, like I said, I don't think about the 1001st time that I wasn't followed in a store.
Right.
Yeah, but every American should be entitled to feel that way. I don't think of it as emptying my backpack. I think of it as
Filling somebody else's.
right. And I think it's a slightly, I think in terms of like thinking in terms of language, I think there's a lot of important points in here that it's almost like I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of them, but I think the phrasing in the Macintosh essay, like, I guess James Baldwin is James Baldwin. So like that nuanced, layered essay that I'm going to be thinking about for many years to come, like, you know, reading the Macintosh essay is, yeah, I guess so. You know, talking about, my schooling gave me no training of seeing myself as an oppressor. I think I probably blathered a lot kind of during the whole session tonight, but I think, there's simultaneously, there's a lot that I agree with in this essay. There's a lot that rubs me the wrong way too. I think it was talking about like the initial talk in the first class about talking about issues of, that fine line between guilt and responsibility, like, the Jewish activists going down south in the 60s. How do you tie apart, untie, is it guilt or responsibility while we're going down south? And when I teach a STEM class to school in Lowell, am I engaging in white savior, or am I doing something useful? There's kind of these fine lines here, but I think, the talks about, kind of sort of the academic almost elite kind of coding that's in this Macintosh essay. A lot of people are going to find off-putting, even though I agree with a lot of it.
Yeah. Look,
It really stimulates your thinking about a subject, and I would be kind of nervous if you agreed with everything that was put in front of you. And obviously not everyone acts out of white privilege. When you go to teach in the local high school, that's a wonderful thing to do. And you shouldn't be second guessing yourself to the point where you no longer do anything because you're afraid of doing the wrong thing.
Yes, that's true. I just think.
Yes, some of the, it's like the Baldwin essay. There were pieces of it that you're like, well, right, which is perfectly. I would be really nervous about a person who says, "Oh yes, this is terrific," and everything they said is just perfectly true, and that doesn't accomplish anything because you're not even thinking about it in the sense that you're not making a choice. You're not examining your thoughts. Like you look at it, you say, "Okay, I agree with half of them, and not the other half." Fine.
Yeah, I guess I don't want to necessarily kind of. I think this essay strikes me differently. I found the Baldwin essay a lot more thought-provoking. There's some things that here that probably think about it some more, and they'll still kind of rub me the wrong way a little bit. And part of it has having to do with language and not maybe the more fundamental points, I think.
Yeah, and look, I hear that, and certainly, languages, they're all shortcuts. Language is by definition a shortcut to deeper ideas, and sometimes we are better, and sometimes we are not as precise in the language. Or even our language changes over time as well. And I would love if we don't, have time necessarily now, but I would love to unpack with you which pieces are not necessarily sitting with you in a way that is comfortable. And we'll say that, for me as well, I one of the things that I have really been challenged with, and Mark, I'm really actually happy that we're sort of closing on this note. is that if there's anything that my study of all of these pieces in these 4 sessions and many other things I've read is that this is really hard work, and some of it's gonna sit and resonate, and others will challenge. And I think the work for all of us is to really use the Mussar skills that we've really been thinking about, to really take those moments, particularly the ones that are hard, and to ask ourselves, what's challenging for me? Is it about the language? Is it about something that's within me that this is touching? I'm not sure. But then to ask, like, what am I supposed to do with that now? And where do I go? And as Peggy McIntosh says, having described it, what I'm feeling, what will I do to lessen or end whatever it is, whatever privileges I have, or what am I going to do to further work on what is bothering me, to make our world a better place? Because ultimately that is what we really need to do together. So yes, Barry.
Okay. I wanted to, my closing remark is after the holidays, we're planning on putting on another program, maybe 2 hours, we're not sure yet. And you were given at the very beginning the vocabulary about race and racism. And we're going to look at this from a Jewish perspective. Are Jews white? Are Jews privileged? Are Jews like everybody else? Is comparative victimology? There's a lot of vocabulary that I think we will find useful in talking about this from a specifically Jewish perspective. And we will be putting out some information about it. It will probably be the end of October, beginning of November. And I hope that you will be interested in continuing this conversation, which I think is enormously important for us as individuals, as Jews, as members of a congregation, as members of the Jewish community, as members of the wider community. I think that will be an important way for us to look at these words, these vocabulary words. How do we respond to them? And like Mark said, some things I think are fine, and some things really annoy me, anger me, get me frustrated, etc.
I'd like to end by amplifying the final comment we have in our chat here. The materials used in the class made me more aware. Here we go. The materials you used in the class made me more aware of my white privilege and my own tendency to be racist in some ways. And I want to amplify that for 2 reasons. One is because I want all of us to be able to have the humility to recognize that within ourselves, to recognize in what ways do we have blind spots, because we all do. In what ways do we all have work to do in ourselves, because we all do. And it takes tremendous humility to be okay with that and to say that. And my bracha, my blessing for all of us is they were able to say that and then feel empowered by that. To not feel ashamed by that, to not feel paralyzed by that, but to feel, okay, I recognize that within myself. And now I feel empowered to move beyond that and to make our world, to use that understanding about myself to make the world a better place. Because ultimately, the point of recognizing that within ourselves is because it's that recognition that then opens our eyes and opens doors for us to repair that within ourselves and to help to repair the world thus around us as well. So with that, I want to thank all of you for joining us on our 4-class journey together. And hopefully this has given you all something to think.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Very well done, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark, for helping to arrange it for us and also to ensure that our classes are put onto YouTube.
Yeah.
As well. So thank all of you guys for being with us on the journey. And we wish all of you a Gemar Tov and a meaningful Yom Kippur. All right. And have a good evening.